Welcome back to Naval Action and episode 24 of A Letter to the King. For those of you unfamiliar with the series, A Letter to the King is my attempt to capture the comings and goings, the to and fro, the biff and the bash on Euro PvP 1. And to begin proceedings, we like to look at where were we at the end of the previous week. So at the end of the previous week, the Brits were really getting stuck into the Spanish. They'd kicked the Spanish out of the north of the Yucatan. They'd made a move on southern Cuba proper, started eating up the islands just south of Cuba, and were really biting into the Spanish hinterland. Meanwhile, the pirates and the Swedes were giving it to each other off the tip of Haiti and around Puerto Escondido and Baracoa. The French were making inways to the Dutch holdings on mainland South America. And the Danes had pretty much pushed the British, well not pretty much, had pushed the British totally out of Haiti and had a good hold on Haiti. Potentially were threatening Jamaica proper. And that's more or less where we were at the end of the previous week. So what happened this week? Well, first of all, the alliances got a little bit funky. Most of us learned that your alliances can expire if you don't revote for them. And as a result, for a little while, the Americans were no longer in alliance with the Brits. They're back in an alliance now. And the coalition kind of splintered a little bit with the Swedes dropping out of alliance with the French, but now it's sort of daisy-chained together. The Spanish are in an alliance with the French are also in an alliance with the Danes, and the Danes are also in alliance with the Swedes. You've got to be a little bit wary of this, however. We were chasing a French trader the other day who tried to make a run for a Swedish port, and of course you can't go into the port unless they're allied directly with you. So a French trader could run into a Danish or a Spanish port, but they couldn't run into a Swedish port because they're only allied by association. And you can only maintain 2 allies at the moment. So basically these guys here have to make sure they sort of maintain the right friends and the right balance. It's a little easier for the group of 3 to achieve that. And our pirate friends are performing merry hell wherever they choose around the map. So what happened this week? Well, it was really a week of 2 halves. The Brits initially absolutely walloped Spain, taking almost all of South Cuba, pushing Spain totally out of the Gulf of Mexico and the Yucatan. And at one point, the Spanish were down to something like 11 ports, and it looked like it could be all over Red Rover for our Spanish friends. There was a little bit of resignation going on in the forums from Spain. There was a little bit of, oh, look, we can't be bothered. It's no big deal. The big port reset's coming soon. And it looked like Spain might be pushed out of the map. There was a bit of a to and fro around Corrientes and Baja. But really, it was all looking a bit bleak. And then in the middle of the week, all of a sudden, Spain turned it around, and over the next 3 or 4 days, really started putting pressure on the Brits, grabbing up the occasional island here and there, until finally they completely broke out. And in a 2 or 3 day period, they retook all of southern Cuba, or the bulk of it. They retook Mujeres, Conil, Contoy, and all the way up to Isil. They also did a wee bit of island hopping, going from Santanilias, and then I think they grabbed up Mosquito Cay. They picked up Placer towards the end of the week, and then they jumped back on to the coast of Panama. So a Spain that looked very much defeated midweek, and down to a dozen ports or something of that order, really made an impressive comeback. They did lose a couple of ports towards the end of the week, Santiago and Guarma Sevilla, I think. Certainly whatever these 2 are, Portillo and I'm not quite sure. These 2 here, they lost. And what was noticeable with the Spanish recovery was that they had a little bit of help from the French. Maybe a week ago, almost no French at all. And there was a little bit more help from the French. It is a bit of a hike for the French, and they do have to set up in advance. It's a 2.5 hour sail, so they do need to free port up in order to help. And now they're in an interesting position, Spain, because not only can they start biting in again to the British holdings in South America, they can also, as they've started to do, move in against the Dutch, and this really puts pressure on the Dutch, and this is why they can be a big aid to France, and why France really should aid Spain. So what we're seeing here is this is the first time these ports have fallen, these Dutch ports have fallen in a very long time. So by being able to hop across these islands, they've now opened up a new front for the Dutch, and that might help the French on their front over here. The fact these ports fell to the Spanish is particularly irksome, as basically most of them could have been defended by the Brits. But really a bit of apathy from the Brits let these ports fall, and I think they may rue that. You know, there's a fair number of people on all nations who are sort of a little bit, well, the port wipe's coming, blah, blah, blah. For me, that's all a bit of an excuse. The port wipe could easily be delayed by a month. There's no sign it's going to be delayed at all, but it could be. This is developers working to developer timetables. So the Dutch now have a new front. The Brits have an exposure around Sandy Bay, Mosquito, Gracias a Dios, and the Spanish are back into the Yucatan. Then, of course, the Spanish are choosing when they put these on what timers so they can defend them. And although they've brought more numbers, the interesting thing now for the Spanish, of course, is their school holidays are over in 3 or 4 days. I think it's the 9th. Everybody goes back from school holidays. And they will now be fighting on multiple fronts themselves. So that in itself becomes more difficult. So we'll have to see how that plays out. Meanwhile, the Dutch made good inroads against the French. The French have been eating into their holdings pretty much since the start of the new alliances patch. However, the Dutch, with a little bit of help from the Brits, really did eat into the French holdings. At one point, they managed to grab up St. George's. That got retaken by the French towards the end of the week. Pampatard has seen some absolutely smashing, cracking battles. So's this port down here. I can't remember his name, Coquino or something. There's been a lot of shipping sunk in the fights between the Dutch and the French. Various stories of 50 ships, 100 ships, 18 ships, first rates in a single day. So there's been some colossal fights down here. And with the Brits turning up to help the Dutch a little bit, that's put the French on the back foot a little bit. I think Spain arriving could help. I'm trying to remember what this is called. Scarborough. Scarborough got taken by the Dutch, which is kind of deep into what was French-held territory. There's a bit more to this story that we'll talk about a bit later. I did discover a bit of a bug in the alliances, and that is if you've got a combined fleet, let's say it's the Brits and the Dutch together sailing up against a French port. If there's, say, 10 Brits and 10 Dutch, the French can tag that group, and the BR's only working on whichever nation they tag, so it's not combining the alliance BR for tagging. So that's all a bit pesky. Although if they bring this dual week malarkey in, it might not really matter. However, fundamentally, the Dutch made a bit of a recovery on this coast and have started eating into French holdings. And that's near really where the Swedes come into play. So what's happened here now is the Swedes dropped out of an alliance with the French, either by design or just because the new mechanics are taking a while to get your head around. And then the Swedes have dropped down here and they picked up El Toco and a couple of other ports. So it looks like they're going to be helping against the Dutch actively down here as well. I can't believe that's a aggressive move by the Swedes against the French. I've got no intel on it, but certainly the Swedes are in here now. And so the Dutch might be effectively up against 3 nations down here. They'll really need the Brits to help because the US are a long way away. And of course on a different tick-tock. Meanwhile, the Swedes and the pirates have been having the odd stoush. And the Swedes kicked the pirates out of Haiti, and they also grabbed up one of their ports on South Cuba. There's been a bit of toing and froing around Baracoa. and the other southern ports. But right now, the Swedes seem to be holding their own against the pirates. The pirates are relatively quiet. There's no real concerted, obvious effort being put in by the pirates. They're not moving against the Americans. They seem to be happy to hold these ports along here. I assume they're holding those for trading purposes and shipbuilding purposes. And really, these have been the only two ports they've been vigorously contesting. The US and the Spanish. Well, the US were very quiet for the majority of the week, and there was really not much looking like there was going to be reported there. But then just towards the end of the week, the US decided to move in, and they grabbed up a couple of ports here, Remedios, I think that might be, and La Aguirre. On these islands, these two here, they're always fighting on these ones, to be honest, over the last month or so. However, a relatively quiet week for the US and a very quiet week for the Danes. Some big fleets at the start of the week sailed over towards Carlisle. I'm not sure whether or not there was any real intention to grab ports up on Jamaica there. It was stopped pretty quickly. That was why the social tag still worked. The social tag's been killed now. So big fleets may be more productive. Might be worth giving that another try, to be honest. But the Danes, relatively quiet. I might be oblivious to stuff they're involved in, quite likely. I've had a bit of a shocking week. I lost my internet for most of it. And then my lovely wife took me away for a couple of days on holidays. So they may be involved on stuff I've just not got my ear to. So apologies if I've not told a story of many Great Dane endeavours. Great Dane, see what I did there? Here every Tuesday, try the pork. Where will the Biffo be going forward? It's very confusing. It all seems very disjointed at the moment. We're playing in the shadow of this new port map. If you've not seen the new port map, get on the forums and jump into the developer announcement forums and have a look in there at the port wipe. In another fortnight, I think it might be around the 23rd, we might see the port wipe come into action. In the meantime, where will the Biffo be? Well, the Yucatan seems an obvious spot for it. I think the Brits will go for these islands. The Spanish will obviously try and hold them. What's going to happen down here, and I should have put a circle around here where they've grabbed up a couple of Dutch ports. I think this is probably where the best PvP is going to be. It's where some of the best PvP was last week. Like I say, there would have been 150 ships sunk over the week here, and the French have taken some really heavy losses and are slightly on the back foot at the moment. Perhaps with the Swedes and the Spanish coming in, the French fortunes will change there. The Swedes and the pirates seem to enjoy swapping a cannonball or two. We might see the US and the Spain get involved on the north. However, the timers really discourage that between the US playtime and the Spanish playtime. And again, in theory, in another couple of weeks with the new port battle mechanics where you're not pulling flags anymore, you're causing ports to be agitated and taking regions. When we know more about that, I'll talk more about that in detail. So the new map's coming. This is an absolutely horrendous graphic, which they've provided, not me. My graphics are horrendous too, but this is Jeheil quality. The water's black. I don't know what that's all about. It must be a heat signature. Who knows? There's another version of this where some players put on a key to try and explain what all these means. But basically, they've subdivided the map into regions. And all the ports will be reclassified. And the interesting thing is really, the Spain will hold most of the map. Places like the Dutch, they'll be down to 6 ports. The Swedes will be down to 1 port. The Danes will be down to next to nothing. The Brits will have a big presence, or relatively big compared to today, in the Antilles. Of course, they'll get the Bahamas back. And so the map will change a great deal. The French will be splattered around a little bit. And all that is old will be new again. We're all going to have to work out Keep an eye on the forums. I will certainly bung a video up when it happens, but at some point you're going to have to move your ships out of ports that are currently your nation's and may now become within the region of another nation. And like I say, you'll find that Spain holds 2/3 of the map. Is that right? Should they? Well, historically, the game is sort of loosely set between the mid 18th century and the early 19th century. And depending on when you throw a dart into the time board, Spain, held a lot of territory at different points between, say, 1760, 1780, 1800, 1820. The whole of the southern coast of the US went to and fro. Whole swathes of the map were ceded in various agreements to the Spanish. So Spain should certainly have a disproportionately large amount of the map. Almost any time period will give you that. From a player mechanics, how easy are they going to make it for us to move stuff around? How much is it going to mess with our trading economy? My understanding is they're going to do a port reset, followed by a rejig of free ports, followed by, or at the same time, a big uplift in the economy and what type of things come where. So the next 2 patches, we're also going to have we're going to get rid of flags and timers, and you're going to agitate a port by doing PvE missions or PvP within the proximity of a region that's going to set ports on tilt so you can actually attack them 48 hours after they've flipped over. There's going to be a limited number of ports that are attackable in a given time period. So if you imagine your little old Sweden and you've only got 1 port, and the most ports that can be agitated at any given point in time is 10, it does mean that growing out of that single port is going to take weeks. Now that's a good thing. It's a challenge, and of course your player base will be concentrated, so that's kind of good. But it also means that shipbuilding is going to require a lot of smuggling and jiggling around with resources and buddying up with allies, and you're probably going to want to buddy up with allies on geo proximity, so you've got ports you can easily sail into from your homeland, as it were. So you may be choosing neighbours as allies rather than friends. And all that's going to be very interesting. It's a sort of delicate time for the game now over the next couple of months. We've all been, entrenched in our existing world with our existing enemies and our existing factions. The Brits own Jamaica, that's their mindset. The Swedes have had this area for a long time. The French are used to holding their area for a long time. This is going to be splattered with British holdings, Plymouth and the likes. So it's going to take a bit of a mental reset as well for most of us. Let's see how that goes. And you may need to choose your enemies, like I say, and your friends based more on geography than on historic precedents, or in-game historic precedents. So how have we gone on ports? Well, the Brits at one stage, they had 114 ports during the week when they were giving the Spanish a good old slap and tickle, but an amazing Spanish comeback, and I'm kind of glad that the Spanish didn't just go into their shell, to be honest. It makes for more fun. It means that the Brits ended up losing 9 ports. So we would have been reporting a gain of about 15 if we'd have made the call midweek. The US gained a couple of ports, which they took off Spain towards the end of the week. The Spanish made a positive gain at the cost to the Brits and the Dutch, a little bit to the Dutch. The Dutch made a positive gain as well, and that's very much at the cost of the French. They took a lot of ports off the French. The Danes, I don't know, secret undercover business. Maybe they're all the developers and too busy coding events that everybody hates. Who knows? And the sneaky Swedes went in and took a bunch of ports, a couple off the pirates and a couple off the French, and we don't know what's going on there, but I'm assuming that's friendly port snaffling. The French took a bit of a pantsing at the hands of the Dutch and also their friendly Swede port swaps, which I assume is what that was. The pirates lost a couple at the hands of the Swedes. And that's pretty much it for the tally board. Just a reminder, I hit my 1,000 subs, woohoo for me, and I'm going to give a couple of ships away. So TDA, one of the US guilds, got in contact with me. Thank you very much, TDA. They got in contact with me and they have offered a special ship, Say No More, to one of the winners, and I will craft any ship I can craft. I can craft every ship in the game apart from the new ones, because I've not been able to get one at 3 o'clock in the morning in one of these wonderful events. But I'll craft anything else, and I'll craft it to your spec. So, you know, if you want yourself a teak rigging victory, I shall craft you a teak rigging victory, even though that would curdle my very blood to do so. I'll put a link in as to how you get into that competition. It's just a pictures competition. Submit a cool naval action related picture. That's open until this weekend, so you've got another 4 or 5 days to submit a picture. And that's about it for this week's naval action. Give us a like, give us a subscribe. I will see you on the oceans, and I will catch you.